Decision making in Python. We learn about what is decision making, if statement, else statement, elif statement, the nested if statement. Now, when do we need to decide or make a decision in a program? So decisions in a program are used when the program has conditional choices to execute a code block. It is the anticipation of conditions occurring while execution of the program and specifying the actions to be taken according to those conditions. Now this is getting too verbose. Let's break it down. Let's relate it to real life. For example, if we have a condition or a situation that if it rains, we'll carry an umbrella. So this is an action which is consequent of the condition. If the condition occurs, that is, we are in the anticipation of a condition, we'll specify certain actions to be taken in accordance to that condition. Now, decision structures evaluate multiple expressions which produce true or false as the outcome, which means that a condition can either be true or false. It cannot be simultaneously true or false. It has to be in only one of these states. We need to determine which action is to be taken and which statements are to be executed if the outcome of the condition is true or false. That is, if the condition, if it rains, is true, I'll carry an umbrella. But if it rains, this condition is invalid or does not occur, the consequent action of carrying an umbrella is also invalid. Now we learn that how decision making can be effectively understood with the help of flowcharts. Now here on the right hand side, we see a diagram which is called a flowchart. The diamond box in this flowchart is where our expression or our condition is put. It is usually started with an if word. That is why it is called an if statement. Now, if this condition is true, that is, if this condition evaluates to true, then the block of code under it gets executed. That is the rectangular box in the diagram which says the body of if. In the case that this if statement does not occur or this situation does not occur, it is false, then the statements which are to be executed under this if statement are not executed. They are ignored because, as I told you, that if the if situation or the condition is invalid, the statements under it or the actions after it are also considered invalid. So they are ignored and the program flow, the control flow, goes to the statements which are just after the if statement. And if there are no statements, then the program just terminates. In the example here, we can see that we have a condition that if 3 is less than 5, we are printing 3 is less than 5 as a statement. This is intended under the if statement, which means that this statement belongs to the if condition. It will be printed only if 3 is less than 5. And any other statement which does not occur within this if block gets executed regardless. Let's see the implementation. If-else statement. An else statement can be combined with an if statement. It contains the block of code that executes if the conditional expression in the if statement resolves to 0 or a false value, which means that in case our if condition does not get satisfied, we come to the else part and execute the block of code under it. The else statement is completely optional and we can have only at most one if, only at most one else following an if. In the flowchart on the right hand side, we can see that the if condition is true, the if code gets executed. Else, if the if condition is false, we come to the else part. In our example here, we can see that if 3 is greater than 5, we print 3 is greater than 5. Else, we print 3 is less than 5. Now, we know for a fact that 3 can never be greater than 5. Hence, our if statement is invalid here and the block of code under it is ignored. We come to the else part and it gets executed. Now let's also see how it gets implemented. Elif statement. The Elif statement is short for the else if statement. It allows you to check multiple expressions for true and execute a block of code as soon as none of the conditions evaluate to true. Similar to the else, it is an optional statement, but unlike else, there can be multiple elif statements, whereas there can be only one else statement following an if. In the flowchart here, you can see that if our test expression in the if statement is not satisfied, we go to the else, to the elif part. Now similarly, the elif conditions are checked. If they result in true, then the body of the elif gets executed. We can have multiple elifs in the same manner, and in the case that our if and all the elifs are invalid or are deemed unsatisfied, then we come to the else code and that gets executed. Let's see an example. Have a look at the elif statement and how it works in accordance with if and else. Here we are asking the user to enter a time according to the 24-hour clock so that we can wish them a message out of these. Now, if the user enters anything between 0 to 10, 0 to 9 actually, which is less than 10, and here we're talking about integers, so we cannot enter something like 915, we have to enter in whole numbers. Now, if we enter 0 to 9, we get a message of good morning. If we enter something which is less than 12, we get soon time for lunch. If we enter something less than 18, we get a message saying good day. If we enter an hour which is less than 22, we get good evening. Else, we get good night. Now let's see how the program functions actually by taking in example. If I enter number 4, let's try and execute this. And it says good morning because the first if statement, that is 4 less than 10, gets satisfied and all the other elif and else block get ignored. Now if I re-execute this with some other example, for example 11, now it says soon time for lunch because it first checks this first if condition. Now 11 is not less than 10. Then it goes to the next statement. This if block gets ignored. Now it checks else if. time is less than 12, which right here is 11. So therefore, we get into this if block and this one gets printed. Now, if we re-execute it with some other example, let's say 17, we get good thing because the first two if conditions are not satisfied and they get ignored. We come here and this condition is checked. It is true and it prints good day, and the rest of the if-else statements get ignored. Now, in the case that we enter something like 20, we get good evening because these conditions get checked first and none of them are satisfied because 20 is greater than 10, 20 is greater than 12, 20 is greater than 18, but it is less than 22. So all of these if conditions are checked first before coming to this if condition, and this one gets satisfied and it prints good evening. Now, if neither of the conditions satisfy, for example, 23, now we do not have a provision to check if something is less than 23. So all of these if else, if, else if, else if, else if, all of these statements get tested, they get exhausted, and we come out to the else statement. And it prints good night. Now, as we looked here, that we can have multiple else if statements to check a lot of conditions, but we can have only one else condition with one if block. Nested if statements. We can have the if, else if, that is elif, and the else statement inside other if, elif, else statements. And we call this nesting. When we have one if inside the other or one if else block inside the other if else block, that is called nesting. And indentation plays a very vital role in here because it tells us about the level of nesting. Now, in the example here, we see that we are asking the user to enter a number and we are checking if it is positive or negative. That is, if it is greater than 0 or less than 0. In our condition, in the if expression, we see that we are checking if the number entered by the user is greater than or equal to 0. Now we are checking two conditions here, that is greater than and equal to. So we have another nested if-else statement inside the first if, which checks for 0, which checks for the equality to 0. And if that is false, we come to the else part, the first if statement. So see that this indentation is helping you notice that this if else comes under this big if. And if that number is a positive number, we come here and check if it is greater than 0 or if it is equal to 0. In the case that it is negative, we skip this entire if block and we go to the else part. Let's see the implementation, and this video will help us understand better. Now let's understand how the nested if-else statements work. Now here I already have the syntax of the example that we were talking about. You can see here that indentation plays a very vital role in determining which if-else statement belongs to another, like parent if-else statement. Now here the num double equals to 0, this if condition and the consequent else condition, they belong to another if here which says that num is greater than 0. Now let's try executing this program. So if we enter a number which is 4, now the statement positive number gets executed. Here the first if statement, that is num, where we have 4 is greater than or equals to, gets satisfied. Therefore the program enters this if block. It checks for the next if whether the num, here 4, is double equals to 0. Now since this condition is false because 4 is not equals to 0, it goes to the else part, wherein it just prints a positive number. Now let's try executing it with another example. Now here it says negative number because the first condition, which is the first if here, that num is greater than or equals to 0, is false because minus 9 is not greater than 0. Hence, this entire if block gets skipped and the consequent else gets executed. The consequent else has the statement of printing negative number, and hence we see that negative number gets printed on the screen. Now let's try with another example. Suppose if I enter 0. Now, since 0 is a number which satisfies this first condition, wherein we've combined the greater than and the equals to condition, now the equals to condition gets satisfied here, and it enters the first if block. Now it checks the first if, that the number is equals to 0 or not. Now here we have entered the number 0, so 0 is equals to 0, and hence this if block gets executed and prints 0.